Hello everyone. Salut à tous, and welcome to a French GCSE and iGCSE video tutorial. So this particular video tutorial is looking at questions in French and how to form questions in French. That is the subject of this video tutorial. So my name, first of all, is Dhananjay Talwar. I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge. I graduated back in 2015, and I've been in the field of education since that time, mostly as a tutor. I've learned more than 20 languages myself at different levels, but that includes at least 9 of them to fluency. And so it's something that I really, really enjoy. Of course, I'm very passionate about languages and language learning, and I'd like to impress this on my students and to motivate them to learn languages and in their language learning and help them to get to their target grades. And I have already done this with more than 500 students so far, helping them to achieve or even exceed their target grade for French GCSE or iGCSE as a full-time tutor. And I have taught other languages too, 8 of them so far for GCSE and iGCSE, and some at higher levels as well. So these are the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. At least as of August 2025, there are 4 of them for GCSE French and 2 different exam boards for iGCSE French. There are, of course, some differences in the format of the exact papers from exam board to exam board. But today we are looking at something more general, a feature of French grammar, which is how to form questions in French. And so this is somewhat more generic and useful for all students. So it doesn't matter what particular exam board you are studying, this video tutorial should still be relevant and useful for you. So these are the question words themselves. Qui, which is who, que or qu'est-ce, what, quand, which means when, où, which is where, pourquoi, which is why, comment, which is how, combien, how many, quel, quel, or quel. All 4 forms have slightly different spellings, but they're all pronounced in exactly the same way, and that translates as which in English. The reason why there are 4 different forms of quel, even though they're all pronounced the same, is because quel effectively, or which effectively, functions as an adjective. So, like an adjective, it has to describe the noun. It has to agree with the noun that it's describing in terms of gender, masculine or feminine, and number, singular or plural. So, quel on the left, that is the masculine singular form. Quel with an extra le at the end, that's the feminine singular form. Quel with quels, that's the masculine plural form. And quel, quelles, is the feminine plural form. So you have to select which of these quels is the correct one, depending on the noun that is being described. These question words are certainly not the only way to form questions in French, as we'll see later, but this is a very, very good starting point. And for GCSE or iGCSE, you definitely need to be aware of all of these question words. You'll see them often in the questions themselves on exam papers. And even in the questions, say, that you're asked in your speaking test. So you'll definitely need to know these ones by heart, and well worth revising them and looking over them thoroughly. Okay, there are, however, other ways to form a question in French. So one way is to use a question word. For example, if you want to say "Who are you?" or so on, or when did you arrive, you would use a question word such as qui, who, or quand. When, which would typically go right at the start of the sentence in French. That's generally the case. Most question words in French do tend to start with a Q or a Q or a C, a K sound as well. That might help to memorize them, perhaps. But there are other ways to form questions in French as well. In fact, there are 3 typical ways to form a question in French. The first one is definitely the simplest, It doesn't require any alteration to the sentence or the words grammatically at all. And that is just to raise your intonation. That can work somewhat in English too. So you raise your intonation towards the end of the sentence, and that indicates that what you're saying is a question rather than just a statement. For example, tu aimes manger les croissants would translate into English as do you like eating croissants? Um, yeah, so tu aimes manger les croissants, or tu aimes manger les croissants, that is a statement. But tu aimes manger les croissants, that is a question. Do you like eating croissants? The first one is a statement. That would be you do like eating croissant, or you like eating croissant. So that's certainly the easiest way to form a question in French, simply through raising your intonation towards the end of the sentence. And for the same reason, perhaps it's also considered the most informal way to form a question in French. So these different forms of creating a question in French become more and more formal as you go down. There's an increase in the degree of formality. So the second type, the second way to form a question in French is using est-ce que. So this combination of words est-ce que translates to something like is it or is it that? And it's commonly used to form questions in French. This way of forming a question is slightly more formal than the first type, which consisted of just raising your intonation. So, for example, you could say est-ce que tu aimes manger les croissants? Do you like eating croissants? Yeah, so quite a few extra bits here compared to the previous way to form a question. A few extra elements to add into the sentence. But this is a reasonably common format for a question in French. Putting in est-ce que can be used, say, with other question words as well. Quand est-ce que tu arrives, for example, when are you arriving or when will you arrive? It's just one example of that. So, yeah, that's the second type of question formation to be aware of. And the third one, which is definitely the most formal, you will come across this in writing, so in written French, reasonably often. And it can come up in spoken French as well, but it is definitely more formal in nature. And it's the most formal of these three ways to form a question, too. That is inverting the subject and the verb. Inverting means switching the order of the subject and the verb. So, in a standard French sentence, just like in English, actually, the subject, the grammatical subject, meaning the person or thing doing the action of the verb, would come first, then the verb, which is the doing word or the action word itself, and then the object, if there is one, which is the person or thing that the action is being done to. In this type of forming a question, so only in this third type of question formation, you would invert or switch the order of the subject and the verb, though. So the verb comes first and then the subject afterwards. So that's switching, or completely turning on its head, actually, the typical structure of a French sentence. So that would become aimes-tu manger les croissants? Instead of tu aimes manger les croissants, which would be the typical statement, you do or you like eating croissants, to make it into a question using this third type of question formation, you would change that order of those first two parts so that the verb comes first, aime, and then the subject, tu. And you typically do have to add in a hyphen in between them to join up the verb and the subject when you invert them in this way to form a question. So that would become aimes-tu manger les croissants? Do you like eating croissants? This last one is rather more formal in nature. And in more informal speech, you tend not to come across this so much. Okay, here is your chance to test yourself. So you have to translate this one question into French in three different ways. Of course, three different ways, one each for the different types of questions that we just saw. So the question is, did I go to France last year? There should be three different ways to render that in French, according to each of the three different types of question formation that we saw just now. So I will give you a bit of time to think over how to phrase each of those. So the first type, which is simply raising your intonation near the end of the sentence. The second type, which is using esque. And the third one, which was using inversion, inverting the order of the subject and verb. Did I go to France last year? That is the question itself. To translate into French, let me give a little bit more time. Okay, let's go over this then. So the first way, which is the easiest, because you don't have to change anything in terms of word order or grammar, is just raising your voice, raising your intonation rather towards the end of the sentence. You don't have to shout or raise your voice necessarily. So that would become Je suis allé en France l'année dernière. So yeah, as long as you clearly raise your intonation towards that end of that sentence, that does make it into a question. So that is, did I go to France last year? The second version uses est-ce, and that is still quite common in French. So that would be est-ce que je suis allé en France l'année dernière? Again, the translation is exactly the same. Did I go to France last year? The second one is somewhere in the middle in terms of formality. And the third one, and the most formal, definitely too, it certainly sounds more formal as well in French, would be suis-je allé en France l'année dernière? So the third one, consists of inversion. So between the subject and the verb. So the verb moves first, then the subject. And then the rest of the sentence stays as it was. Of course, the auxiliary verb used here is être. So you would stick an extra e on the end of the past participle, aller, if the subject is feminine. So if it's a girl talking. Those are the three different forms of questions, or three different ways to form a question in French using this particular example. Did I go to France last year? Okay, so here is a brief quiz to test your knowledge of question formation in French. Number one, what is considered the most formal way to phrase a question in French? Let me give you some seconds to think through this. Okay, and I will show you the answer. So the answer is that inversion is considered the most formal way to phrase a question in French. For example, aimes-tu or savez-vous, and so on. And you would have a hyphen in between the verb and the subject. And of course, inversion means that you change the order of the subjects and verbs, so the verb comes first, then the grammatical subject of the sentence. Question 2 is true or false. Est-ce, which can be used to form a question, always comes right at the beginning of the sentence in French. Is that true or false? Think over it. And then I will shortly show you the answer. Yep, let me click to show the answer now. So this one is false. Est-ce does not absolutely always actually have to come right at the beginning of a French sentence. It usually does, very often does, but depending on the question, it could be placed later too. For example, in a sentence like quand est-ce que tu arrives? When are you arriving, or when will you arrive? Est-ce comes just after the question word. So if there is a question word in a French sentence, that will come right at the start, actually. And est-ce would follow, would come just after that. So est-ce is not always right at the beginning of a French sentence. Question 3, true or false again. You can create a question in French simply by raising your intonation. Again, I'll give a few seconds to think through this one. Okay, and I'll show you the answer. So this one is true, a somewhat simpler or more straightforward question, I think, than the last one. You can create a question in French just by raising your intonation without changing the sentence itself at all. And finally, question 4, which question word can change form depending on what comes just after? Again, let me give you some time. Okay, here we go. This is the answer. Yeah, it's the question word which itself that can change form depending on what comes after, as this functions as an adjective, so it has to agree with the noun it's describing. So always remember that whenever you use the word which in French, quel, there are actually 4 different forms, even though they're all pronounced exactly the same way in French. So yeah, you have to alter that form. You have to choose the correct one depending on the noun that is being described. Okay, if you have questions at all about any of this, or if you'd like more information about more personalized help that I do offer as well, you can get in touch by email, through Facebook or Instagram. Yeah, and I do post on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn every single day, sharing that passion for languages with everybody, and hopefully motivating and inspiring more people to learn languages. That's the aim, and letting them know why it's beneficial to do so and just how it can be so rewarding. I do post a lot about French, GCSE, and iGCSE, and other languages for GCSE and iGCSE too. Yeah, and helping students to get to their goals, techniques to revise and study for GCSEs and iGCSEs, how to create a revision plan, and more. So all of that is accessible on those platforms. I do have many resources available, including free resources for French GCSE and iGCSE, and a Facebook group that I run with tips and masterclasses, which is also free to join for French GCSE and iGCSE students and their parents. And I also do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and quite a lot more. So don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to know more about any of that.